This story is titled "My Daughter Said I Wasn't Supportive and Banned Me from Her Wedding, so I Froze My Cards and Now She's in Debt." Hey everyone, if you're enjoying these stories and want to support the channel, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. It helps me bring you more amazing content like this. Now let's dive into the story. The original poster, OP, begins by saying they never imagined they'd end up in this situation. They worked tirelessly to provide their daughter Claire with the life they felt she deserved after everything fell apart following their divorce. Claire was 12 when Stefan and OP split up, and although the divorce wasn't particularly messy, it still took a toll on Claire. Stefan remarried within a year and quickly had 3 more kids, a baby girl followed by twin boys. While Stefan embraced his new life, Claire felt left out, like she didn't belong anywhere. Initially, OP didn't recognize the signs of Claire's feelings. They assumed she just needed time to adapt to the changes in their family dynamic. However, as time went on, it became increasingly clear that Claire felt pushed aside, as if her mother had replaced her. To make matters worse, Stefan wasn't subtle about where her priorities lay. She directed most of her attention to her new children, leaving Claire to manage her emotions on her own. Seeing this, OP knew they had to step up. Determined to be the anchor Claire needed, OP worked extra hours to provide for her, attended all her games and parent-teacher conferences, and celebrated every milestone. They wanted to be the person Claire could always count on. Looking back now, though, OP wonders if they went too far, if they overprotected Claire, gave her too much, or failed to teach her independence. Things started to unravel when Claire decided to take a 2-year break from high school. She said she needed time to figure herself out. While OP wasn't thrilled about the idea, they wanted to support her, telling themselves that not every kid follows the same timeline and that it was okay for her to take her time. Unfortunately, what began as a break for self-discovery quickly became an excuse to do nothing. Instead of pursuing hobbies or sports, Claire spent her days watching TV, scrolling through her phone, and hanging out with aimless friends who seemed to influence her negatively. When OP tried to talk to her about their concerns, the conversations always escalated into fights. Any suggestion that Claire needed to focus on her future was met with accusations that OP didn't understand or wasn't supportive. It felt like OP was constantly walking on eggshells, trying to balance being there for Claire while also guiding her toward a better path. The breaking point came one night when OP caught Claire trying to sneak out through her bedroom window after they had gone to bed. When confronted, Claire lashed out, screaming at OP as if they were the villain in her life. She couldn't see that OP's actions were meant to protect her. She only viewed them as an obstacle. That night, OP reflected deeply on what had gone wrong. Had they been too permissive? Had they given Claire too much freedom? Or were these challenges rooted in something beyond their control, like the divorce or her sense of abandonment by her mother? Desperate to help her, OP suggested therapy. For a while, therapy seemed promising. Claire appeared calmer and more willing to open up about her feelings. But as soon as sessions became difficult or uncomfortable, she would quit. This cycle repeated for years: therapy, quitting, acting out, and starting therapy again. OP tried everything else they could think of: heartfelt late-night talks, family vacations, even bribes like new gadgets to motivate Claire to focus on school or sports. But nothing seemed to work. After 2 long years, Claire finally agreed to return to school. OP felt an overwhelming sense of relief and hope, believing this was the turning point. They thought the years of stress and heartbreak had finally paid off. But that relief was short-lived. Not even 6 months after going back to school, Claire met Jake. Jake, 26, worked as a delivery driver for his parents' bakery. He had dropped out of school in the 9th grade and had been aimlessly drifting through life ever since. His philosophy was, Let's see where life takes me. While Opie initially refrained from judging him, believing honest work is still valuable, it didn't take long to notice red flags. Jake wasn't just unmotivated, he was reckless. At 21, he had already been married once. That marriage ended after just 6 months because, in Jake's words, it just wasn't working. To OP, it was obvious Jake wasn't ready for serious commitments, let alone marriage. Claire, however, saw none of this. In her eyes, Jake was perfect, charming, funny, and someone who made her feel special in a way she hadn't felt in years. OP wanted to trust Claire's judgment and be happy for her, but every aspect of their relationship set off alarms. Then, out of nowhere, Claire announced she and Jake were getting married. It wasn't a discussion or a request for advice, it was a decision she had already made. The date was set and wedding plans were underway, all without informing OP. When OP tried to express their concerns, Claire dismissed them, accusing OP of being jealous of her happiness. OP was left speechless. How do you reason with someone blinded by love? How do you convince your child they're making a mistake when they're convinced they know best? That night, OP sat alone in the living room, staring at the walls, wondering where they had gone wrong. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made for Claire, the countless times I prioritized her needs above my own, and everything I did to try and be the best father possible. Now, I found myself helplessly watching her rush headlong into a disaster I couldn't prevent. It was the first time I truly understood that no matter how much you love your child, you can't shield them from the consequences of their own choices. The day Claire told me she was getting married felt like a punch to the gut. She didn't sit me down or ask for my opinion. She just casually dropped the news over dinner, as though she were announcing which movie she wanted to see. Jake and I are getting married next month, she said with a smile, as if she'd just shared the best news ever. For a moment, I thought she had to be joking. What do you mean, marry? I asked, hoping I'd misunderstood. We're in love, she replied with a shrug, as though it were no big deal. We've already set a date and started planning. I was stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My 19-year-old daughter, who hadn't even finished high school and didn't have a job, was planning to marry a man she'd only been dating for a few months, a man with no ambition or direction in life. Claire, don't you think this is a bit rushed? I asked, trying to keep my tone calm. Marriage is a big decision. Have you really thought this through? You rolled her eyes. Dad, you always overthink everything. Jake and I are soulmates. We don't need your approval. That hit me like a brick wall. I had always been the parent she could depend on, the one who supported her through everything. And now she was telling me my opinion didn't matter. I tried again, reasoning with her. Claire, you're so young. You have your entire life ahead of you. Why not take some time to focus on school and your future? Marriage can wait. Her expression turned icy. You're just being negative. I knew you wouldn't support me, she said coldly. That's when I realized just how serious she was. This wasn't a fleeting phase or an act of rebellion. She genuinely believed she was making the right decision, and nothing I said would change her mind. Over the next few days, I tried to bring up the subject again, but every conversation turned into a fight. I raised practical concerns, asking how they planned to support themselves. Do you have a financial plan? Where will you live? How will you pay for rent or bills? I asked. She dismissed my worries as though they were trivial. We'll figure it out, she said confidently. Love is all we need. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Claire, love is important, but it doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't put food on the table. Marriage is about more than romance. It's about responsibility." She rolled her eyes again. "You're so stuck in the past, Dad. Things are different now. You just don't get it." I wanted to scream. How could she not see the mistakes she was making? How could she be so blind to the reality of what she was getting herself into? Things escalated when I asked to meet Jake. I figured if I couldn't get through to Claire, maybe I could talk some sense into him. We met at a local diner, and I tried to keep an open mind. On the surface, Jake seemed pleasant, polite, friendly, even a little charming. But as we talked, it became clear he had no idea what he was getting into. "What's your plan for the future?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He shrugged. "We'll figure it out as we go." I clenched my jaw, trying to hold back my frustration. "Marriage isn't something you can just figure out," I said. "It requires planning and preparation. Do you have any savings, a budget, or even a long-term goal?" He nodded along like he was listening, but it was clear he wasn't taking anything seriously. I tried another angle. "Claire's still in school, and she doesn't have a job. Are you prepared to support her financially until she gets on her feet?" His response was exactly what I feared. "We'll manage. Love is more important than money." That was when I realized this wasn't going to work. Jake wasn't a bad person, but he was utterly unprepared for the responsibilities of marriage, and Claire, who was already struggling to find stability, was diving headfirst into a situation that would only make things harder for her. When I got home that evening, I sat Claire down for another talk. I shared my concerns and pleaded with her to reconsider. "Claire, I'm not trying to control your life," I said gently. "I just want what's best for you. Can't you see this isn't the right time for marriage? You have so much potential and so many opportunities ahead of you. Why rush into this?" Her response was like ice. "If you can't support me, then I don't want you at my wedding," she said flatly. Those words felt like a knife to the heart. "Claire, you don't mean that," I whispered. "I do," she replied firmly. "If you're just going to be negative, I don't want your bad energy ruining my big day." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own daughter was banning me from her wedding because I disagreed with her decision. That night, I made a choice. If she didn't want me at her wedding, I wasn't going to pay for it. Claire had been planning the entire event using the credit card I'd given her for emergencies. The next morning, I froze the card. It didn't take long for her to notice. Within hours, my phone was flooded with angry calls and messages. "How could you do this to me?" she screamed. "You're trying to sabotage my happiness." I took a deep breath and kept my voice steady. "Claire, if you're old enough to make adult decisions, then you're old enough to handle the consequences. If you don't want me at your wedding, I'm not going to pay for it." Her reaction was exactly what I expected. She called me selfish, controlling, and heartless. She said I didn't care about her happiness and accused me of trying to ruin her life. But for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I loved Claire more than anything, but I couldn't keep enabling her bad choices. If she wanted to act like an adult, she needed to start taking responsibility. She needed to understand what it meant to take responsibility for her decisions. Even though it hurt, I knew I was making the right choice. After freezing Claire's credit card, I was fully aware things would escalate. It wasn't something I wanted to do, but I wasn't going to fund a wedding I wasn't invited to. For me, the boundary was clear. If I wasn't welcome, neither was my money. Claire didn't take it well. That night, she burst into the house, her face flushed with anger. "How could you do this to me, Dad?" she yelled the moment she stepped through the door. I stood firm. "Claire, I've supported you your whole life. I've been there through everything, even when you didn't want me to be. But I'm not going to pay for a wedding I'm not allowed to attend. That's not how this works." "You're just being selfish," she screamed back. "You don't care about my happiness. You just want control over my life." Her words hurt, but I kept my composure. "No, Claire, I care about your future. And that's why I'm saying no. If you're old enough to make adult decisions, then you're old enough to deal with adult consequences." She stormed off to her room and slammed the door behind her. For the next several days, she barely spoke to me. She avoided me whenever possible, only coming out to grab food or leave the house. The tension in the air was suffocating, but I refused to back down. Realizing I needed help, I decided to call in reinforcements. Claire had always been close to her grandmother, my mom, and I hoped she might have better luck getting through to her. My mom, Evelyn, is a no-nonsense woman in her 70s who has never hesitated to speak her mind. She raised me with tough love, and I figured that might be exactly what Claire needed right now. When I explained the situation to my mom, she sighed deeply. Girl is just like her mother," she said, "stubborn as a mule and too proud to admit when she's wrong. But I'll talk to her." We arranged a family meeting with my mom leading the conversation. Claire sat across from us with her arms crossed, her face locked in a scowl. My mom didn't waste any time. "Claire, marriage isn't just about love," she began. "It's about commitment, responsibility, and planning. Have you and Jake thought about any of that? How are you going to support yourselves? Do you have savings, a budget, or a plan for your future?" Claire rolled her eyes. "We'll figure it out, Grandma. Times have changed. It's not like it was in your day." My mom's expression hardened. "You think times have changed, but the basics haven't. Love doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't keep a roof over your head or put food on the table. You need a solid foundation to build a life together. From what your dad's told me, you and Jake don't have that." Claire stayed silent, her arms still folded. My mom continued, sharing stories about her own struggles when she and my dad first got married. She spoke about the sacrifices they made, the financial hardships they endured, and the effort it took to create a stable life. "Marriage isn't a fairy tale, Claire," she said. "It's hard work. If you're not ready for that, it'll fall apart faster than you think." Finally, Claire spoke, her tone cold and defiant. "You don't understand. Jake and I know what we're doing. We love each other, and that's all that matters." As much as I wanted to believe Claire would come to her senses, I knew deep down she wouldn't. After I froze the credit card, she and Jake found another way to go through with their wedding. One evening, she came home and slammed the door behind her. I didn't even need to ask. "We took out a loan," she said, her voice filled with defiance. "You think you can stop this wedding? Guess what, Dad? It's happening whether you like it or not." I stared at her, struggling to process what she'd just said. "You took out a loan, Claire? Do you even realize what you've done? You're barely an adult, and now you're in debt before you've even started your life." "Don't lecture me," she snapped. "We're doing what we have to do. Not that you care, since you abandoned me when I needed you the most." The way she twisted the narrative made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Claire, I didn't abandon you. You pushed me away. You banned me from your wedding. Don't try to turn this around on me." She rolled her eyes and stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. It was clear there was no getting through to her. A week later, the wedding happened. I wasn't invited, of course, but my neighbor Lily gave me an update. Her daughter, one of Claire's childhood friends, had attended the wedding out of obligation. "It was okay, I guess," Lily said when we ran into each other at the grocery store. They had a small venue, some flowers, and even a live band, but you could tell it was all thrown together at the last minute. She hesitated before adding, "Jake's parents didn't look happy. They were polite, but you could see it on their faces. They think this is a bad idea, too." Hearing that didn't bring me any comfort. I had hoped Jake's parents might have been able to talk some sense into him, but apparently they were just as powerless as I was. On the day of the wedding, I stayed home and tried to distract myself. I told myself it didn't matter, that it wasn't worth getting upset over. But deep down, I was heartbroken. Every father dreams of walking his daughter down the aisle, of seeing her start a new chapter in her life, surrounded by love and support. Instead, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the walls and wondering where it all went wrong. Before Claire left for the ceremony, I slipped a note into her room. It wasn't much, just a few words wishing her the best and hoping she'd find happiness, even if I didn't agree with her choices. As much as I opposed this wedding, I couldn't bring myself to wish anything bad for my daughter. No matter how much she'd hurt me, I still wanted the best for her. A few months passed after the wedding, and things were quiet. Claire moved into a small apartment with Jake. She didn't call, visit, or even text. The silence was painful. But I convinced myself it was for the best. She needed to figure things out on her own, and I couldn't keep rescuing her from every bad decision. Then, one evening, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I was surprised to see Jake standing there. He looked completely worn out, like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were wrinkled, and dark circles hung under his eyes. "Can we talk?" Jake asked quietly, barely above a whisper. I hesitated for a moment before stepping aside to let him in. "What's going on?" I asked, already bracing myself for an answer I didn't want to hear. Jake sat on the couch, nervously rubbing his hands together. "We're struggling," he admitted. "The loan payments are higher than we expected, and rent's gone up. I've been picking up extra shifts, but it's not enough. Claire's been applying for jobs, but, I knew exactly what he meant. Claire was a high school dropout with little work experience. The kind of jobs she could land wouldn't pay much, and, knowing her, she was probably being selective about what she was willing to do. "We're behind on everything," Jake continued. "Rent, utilities, the loan payments. We're drowning. I don't know what to do. I was hoping maybe you could help us out, just until we get back on track." I leaned back in my chair, looking at him. Part of me wanted to feel sympathy. He seemed genuinely overwhelmed and desperate. But another part of me couldn't forget the arrogance he'd shown when I'd tried to warn him before the wedding. "Jake," I began, keeping my tone steady, "when you and Claire decided to get married, you told me love was all you needed, and that money didn't matter. Do you still believe that?" He avoided my eyes, staring down at his hands. "I was wrong," he muttered. I nodded. I'm sorry you're struggling, but I can't help you. This is your problem to solve, and you need to figure out how to fix it." He looked like I'd just punched him. "You won't even help a little? Just enough to get us through this rough patch?" "No," I said firmly. "Claire made it very clear that she didn't want me involved in her life. I'm respecting her wishes." Jake sat there for a moment, his shoulders slumped, before finally standing up. "I understand," he said softly. "Thanks anyway." As he walked to the door, I felt a pang of guilt, but I reminded myself that bailing them out wouldn't help them learn. If I stepped in now, they'd never take responsibility for the choices they'd made. That night, Claire called me for the first time since the wedding, and she was furious. How could you turn Jake away like that?" she yelled. "He came to you in good faith, and you humiliated him." I sighed, already weary of the argument I knew was coming. "Claire, you're the one who wanted me out of your life. You can't just expect me to step in now because things aren't going the way you planned." "You're heartless," she screamed. "You don't care about me at all." I stayed calm. "I care about you more than you realize. That's why I'm letting you face the consequences of your actions. This is what being an adult looks like, Claire. It's not all romance and fairy tales. It's hard work and responsibility." She hung up on me, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty. Update. A few weeks after Jake came to my door and Claire called in a rage, I thought things had settled down. Claire wasn't speaking to me, and I didn't try to reach out to her either. I figured she needed time to work through her situation, and I wasn't going to interfere. As much as it hurt to see her struggling, I knew she had to learn this lesson on her own. Then, late one night, my phone buzzed. It was a series of frantic texts from Claire. "Dad, are you awake? Please, I need to talk to you. I don't know what to do." There was a long pause on the other end. When she finally spoke, her voice was trembling. I think I might be pregnant." I froze. Out of everything I thought she might say, this hadn't crossed my mind. "Are you sure?" I asked. I wanted to say this is what you signed up for, but I couldn't bring myself to be that harsh. No matter how much Claire had hurt me, she was still my daughter, and she was scared. "Okay," I said gently. "The first step is to confirm it. I'll schedule a doctor's appointment for you tomorrow. Until then, take a deep breath and try not to panic." The next morning, I called a local clinic and made an appointment for her. She was anxious the entire way there, biting her nails and fidgeting in the passenger seat. When we arrived, I stayed in the car while she went inside. About 30 minutes later, she came back and slid into the seat silently. "What did they say?" I asked. "They told me to wait a week before taking another test," she replied quietly. "It's too early to tell." For the next week, Claire was a wreck. She barely slept and spent most of her time pacing around the apartment she shared with Jake. She texted me constantly, asking for advice or just looking for reassurance. It was obvious she was terrified, and for the first time in months, she genuinely wanted my support. During one of our conversations, she brought up Jake. "Dad, do you think you could hire him at your agency, just for a little while until we get back on our feet?" I run a small creative agency, and the job requires specific skills Jake didn't have. Honestly, I also doubted he had the discipline to learn them. But Claire was desperate, and I could feel the pressure mounting. "Let's wait for the results of your test," I told her. "We'll figure things out after that." She wasn't satisfied. "You're just making excuses," she snapped. "Why can't you ever help when I need you?" Her accusation stung, but I held my ground. "Claire, I'm not making a decision until we know what we're dealing with. Let's take this one step at a time." Thankfully, the pregnancy scare turned out to be just that, a scare. When Claire got the results from the second test, she wasn't pregnant. I thought the relief might humble her, but instead, it seemed to make her even more bitter. "You wouldn't even hire Jake," she said angrily during one of our arguments. "What kind of father doesn't help his daughter when she's struggling?" I sighed. "Claire, I've spent your entire life trying to help you, but you've made it clear you don't want me involved. You can't have it both ways." She folded her arms and glared at me. "You know everything you have is going to be mine one day. You could at least act like you care about my future." Her words stunned me. "Claire, nothing is guaranteed. If you think you're entitled to everything I've worked for, you're mistaken. I might retire early, travel, or even get married again. What I leave behind is up to me. not you." Her face twisted with anger. "You're selfish," she spat. "You don't care about anyone but yourself." I didn't even bother arguing. There was no point. Over the next few weeks, our relationship grew colder. Claire stopped reaching out, and whenever I tried to contact her, she ignored me. I could feel the gap between us widening, and it broke my heart. I thought about giving in, sending her money or helping Jake find a job, but I knew it would only make things worse. Claire needed to learn from her choices the hard way. She had to understand that her actions had consequences and that she couldn't keep depending on me to fix everything. But knowing this didn't make it any easier. Every day I thought about calling her, about trying to repair the damage between us, but I also knew that unless she was willing to take responsibility, nothing would really change. A few days ago, I got a call from my ex-wife, Stephanie. She was furious. "How could you let Claire struggle like this?" she demanded. "She's your daughter. You're supposed to help her." I took a deep breath before replying. "Stephanie, I've been helping Claire her entire life, but this isn't about me anymore. She made her decisions, and now she has to deal with them." Stephanie wasn't satisfied. "You're ruining her life," she snapped. "No," I said firmly. "Claire is in charge of her own life now. If she wants things to improve, she has to take accountability." Stephanie hung up on me, and I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone. I hated that it had come to this, but I didn't see any other option. Every day I hoped Claire would come to understand that I was only trying to protect her, and that everything I'd done was out of love. But until that day arrived, all I could do was wait. Update 2. Months passed in silence. Claire and I weren't speaking, and any news I got about her came through our neighbor Lily or a few of her remaining friends. Most people had stopped reaching out to Claire because of her stubbornness and refusal to listen to advice. It was painful to see her isolating herself, but I reminded myself that she needed to face the reality of her choices on her own. Then, one evening, I got another late-night call. This time, it wasn't Claire, it was Jake. "Hey, Mr. Carter," he began, his voice shaky. "I know we haven't talked much since, well, you know, but I wanted to let you know that Claire isn't doing so well." My stomach sank. "What do you mean? Is she okay?" "She's just really stressed," he said. "The bills are piling up and she hasn't been able to find a job. We're fighting all the time. I don't know what to do anymore." For a moment I felt a pang of sympathy, but then I reminded myself that this was the life they'd chosen. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully. "But Jake, you and Claire got married despite everyone's advice. You took out a loan for a wedding you couldn't afford. You both knew what you were getting into." Jake's call lingered in my mind for the rest of the week. As much as I wanted to step in and fix everything, I knew I couldn't. Claire and Jake needed to learn how to deal with their problems without leaning on me. Then, out of the blue, Claire texted me, "I need to talk to you." I called her immediately, and for the first time in months, she picked up. "What's going on?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She took a deep breath before answering. "Jake and I are thinking about moving back in with his parents. We can't afford the apartment anymore, and we're falling behind on everything. I don't know what to do." It was the most vulnerable I'd heard Claire in a long time. For a brief moment, I thought about offering to let them move back in with me, but then I remembered how things had gone the last time I tried to help her. She didn't want my guidance or my rules, only my resources. "Have you talked to Jake's parents about it?" I asked instead. "Yeah," she replied, her voice small. "They said we could move into their basement, but I don't want to live there. It feels like giving up." Claire, sometimes you need to take a step back to move forward, I told her. If moving in with his parents helps you get back on your feet, then that's what you should do. It's not giving up, it's being practical. She didn't respond right away. When she finally did, her tone was defensive. You wouldn't understand. You've never had to go through this. I sighed. Claire, I've made my share of mistakes, but I also learned from them. That's what you need to do. Learn and grow. I can't do it for you. A few weeks later, Claire and Jake moved into his parents' basement. According to Lily, things were tense between them and Jake's parents. His dad was frustrated with their lack of direction, and his mom was tired of constantly cleaning up after them. One evening, Jake's dad called me. "Carter, I hate to bother you, but I'm at my wit's end with these two," he said. "They don't seem to understand how much effort it takes to build a life together. They're still acting like teenagers." I felt a mix of frustration and sadness. "I understand," I said. "I tried to warn them, but they didn't listen. At this point, they have to figure it out themselves." Jake's dad sighed. "Oh, I just hope they figure it out before it's too late." As the months went on, things didn't get better. Claire and Jake were constantly arguing, and the financial strain was putting a heavy burden on their relationship. One day, Claire called me in tears. "Dad, I think Jake and I made a mistake," she said through sobs. "What happened?" I asked, my heart sinking. "He's not who I thought he was. He doesn't help around the house and spends all his time complaining about work. I feel like I'm doing everything on my own." I wanted to say I told you so, but I held back. Instead, I said, "Claire, marriage is hard. It takes effort from both people. Have you tried talking to him about how you feel?" "I've tried," she said. "But he doesn't listen. He just says I'm nagging him." For the first time, I heard doubt in her voice. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to grasp the weight of her decisions. Even after everything, Claire still hadn't apologized for banning me from her wedding or the way she had treated me. Part of me wanted to let it go and focus on rebuilding our relationship, but another part couldn't forget how deeply her actions had hurt me. One day, during a phone call, I brought it up. "Claire, can we talk about the wedding?" I asked. "What about it?" she replied, her tone defensive. "You banned me from one of the most important days of your life. Do you regret that?" There was a long silence before she answered. "I was angry," she admitted. "I felt like you didn't support me." "I was trying to protect you," I said. "Everything I've ever done has been because I wanted what was best for you, even when it meant making hard decisions." She didn't respond, and I didn't push. I knew it would take time for her to fully grasp the consequences of her actions. Right now, Claire and I are in a better place than we were a few months ago, but things are far from perfect. She's still headstrong and proud, and I'm still trying to find the right balance between helping her and letting her learn on her own. Every day, I hope she'll realize I've always had her best interests at heart. Until then, I'm doing my best to be patient, because that's what being a parent is. Loving your child even when they make it hard.